Hello and welcome to De-Extinction through the dutiful lens of moral philosophy. Species resurrection has received a great deal of attention in the scientific community. Unfortunately, scientists have been extremely focused on its methodologies and logistics rather than any ethical conundrums the process may generate. Put simply, de-extinction is the process of resurrecting extinct species through genetic methods. Its techniques are being disseminated freely throughout the scientific community, yet our judicial systems have failed to draft any extinction addendums to our current set of wildlife laws. Additionally, de-extinction methods harbour ominous potential, from its uses in aesthetics to the creation of biological weapons. One of the major arguments against de-extinction is the potential for unintended suffering to occur. Some welfarists even akin genetic manipulation to experimentation. A wide array of defects and abnormalities have been observed in cloned animals, both pre- and postnatally. For example, some clones may have suffered from a variety of lung, kidney, cardiovascular, liver, joint, or brain defects. Surrogate mothers have also suffered in the form of abnormal placentation, pregnancy toxemia, hydrolantois, and late gestational fetal loss. Another concern for surrogate mothers is the self-explanatory problem of increased fetal size. Consider the prospect of resurrecting the extinct Steller sea cow, for example. A report published by D.N. Wells in 2005 revealed that only 6% of all embryos transferred to recipient surrogate cows resulted in the creation of healthy, long-term surviving clones. For most ecologists, the end goal of any de-extinction program is to rejuvenate a decimated population and return them to live freely in the wild. Unfortunately, genetic engineering occurs in a captive setting and may foster hidden dangers to a de-extincted individual. Sterile environments can inhibit newborns from acquiring environmental-specific antibodies needed for a strong and healthy immune system. An animal may develop psychological deficits, become desensitized to human interaction, or worse, imprint on a human being. Animals that fail to meet successful release criteria have one of two options: euthanasia or a life of further captivity. As moral agents, human beings have an obligation to think before we act. If death is considered as a welfare indicator, then de-extinction techniques warrant further thought and deliberation. A 2002 figure from the National Research Council of America provides an overview of all mammal cloning experiments to date. A key detail to glean from this data is the significant drop in the number of births, indicating a high amount of fetal death prior to parturition. Considering de-extinction from an axiological perspective, Aldo Leopold's influential formula promotes a hands-off approach in the event that our actions disrupt an ecosystem's natural equilibrium. He says, "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise." Much like the philosophical viewpoint of transcendentalism, Leopold's view values natural autonomy and its ability to maintain its independence. It can be argued, however, that most ecological extinctions have been human-triggered, that in order to right our wrongs, we must do everything in our power to bring back extinct species, and that it is illogical to apply Leopold's viewpoint to an environment that has already lost its intrinsic value. On the other hand, if de-extinction becomes common practice in the near future, the general populace may pay less attention to our impacts on the Earth, knowing full well that extinction is no longer a death sentence for endangered species. Lastly, de-extinction experiments have the potential to consume money that would otherwise be used for traditional conservation programs. If the results of a de-extinction program harbour unwanted ecological side effects, then conservation programs such as wildlife rehabilitation hospitals or anti-poaching units would suffer from an increased workload and loss of potential income. In 2017, Bennett et al. Analysed Australia and New Zealand's conservation funding allocations, specifically the amount of conservation programs that can be funded alongside resurrection projects. The red bar depicts a negative amount when resurrection programs are funded solely by the government. the yellow if resurrection programs are sourced externally, and the blue redirecting all resurrection funds towards traditional conservation methods. Throughout the processes of natural selection, predatory animals have evolved tactful methods of acquiring their prey. In response to them, prey animals have developed various defense mechanisms. This biological arms race has been refined over generations and is extremely taxing on both animals to employ. Consider the predator-prey arms race between the garter snake and the Taricha newt, a deadly game between the strength of a newt's neurotoxin and the resistance a snake can employ. If the garter snake were to become a candidate for de-extinction, ecologists would need to assess the status of newt neurotoxin levels, since the absence of the garter snake may have reduced the newt's neurotoxin potency. Or what would happen if the Balinese tiger was reintroduced into the jungles of Indonesia? It has been 100 years since their extinction, or approximately 33 generations of primate life cycles. Capable of a primitive form of syntax, monkeys are able to communicate their conspecifics, the type of predator they see, its location, and the urgency of the situation. Would a monkey know what to classify a new species of tiger as when signalling an alarm call to their family members? Another survival trait to consider is transgenerational memory repositories. A prominent example of this is the knowledge that an elephant matriarch passes on, such as locations of watering holes during severe drought periods. If de-extinction methods were to be employed for the African elephant, ecologists would need to account for this when designing its reintroduction program. It would also be prudent to factor in an elephant's memory of sanctuary locations away from poachers, predator defense mechanisms, their use of tools, and calf protection techniques. Looking at de-extinction from a positive angle, it is important to promote some of the ecological benefits it may generate. As a way to assist conservation programs, scientists could focus on recovering extinct species that provide certain services, such as ecosystem engineers, keystone species, umbrella species, or animals indicative of ecosystem health. As a whole, these animals transform habitat structure, impose trophic cascades, live in a habitat that overlaps with other threatened species, and are easy to locate. Lastly, genetic engineering has the potential to rescue critically endangered species through the process of translocation. Consider the African elephant and the ivory trade. Anti-poaching techniques have prevented extinction, yet their numbers are continuing to drop due to local poverty, political corruption, and global ivory prices. If the species were to be genetically engineered for a life in cooler climates, the species could survive in countries that can afford improved security measures. Until such a time that third world countries sustain their own wildlife, the African elephant could live as a wildlife refugee in the plains of northern Europe. Since life on Earth began, approximately 99% of all species that have come to fruition have gone extinct. Yet, humans have only inhabited this planet for a mere few thousand years. Many scientists agree that anthropogenic generated extinction deserves a second chance at life. However, this opinion shifts when considering species that have perished from natural causes. To make things even more complicated, neo-Darwinists believe that extinction is the result of natural selection, whereas paleoclimatologists believe it is the result of biosphere fluctuations in the form of volcanic activity and climate change. A popular candidate for de-extinction is the woolly mammoth, the last of the Mamanthus genus to be negatively impacted by an interglacial warming period. Scientists cannot agree on the cause of the species extinction, since spear tips have been found in some fossil records, indicative of human hunting. If the woolly mammoth became extinct from both hunting as well as non-anthropogenic climate change, then how can we know for certain if the species should be extinct or not? Their lineage still exists today in the form of Asian and African elephants, who have evolved a series of physical traits that function in warmer climates. Is the extinction of the woolly mammoth simply nature's way of adapting animal lineages to an ever-fluctuating climate? What we do know about mass extinctions is the form in which their aftermaths take. Often, fossil fauna and flora are few, dominated only by a primary or secondary species. When full diversity returns, it often has a striking difference to the previous ecological era. As de-extinction methods are attempting to reverse a biological process we do not fully yet comprehend, logic dictates a hands-off approach to an engagement between synthetic and traditional conservative biology. It is clear that human civilization has been the main driver of global biodiversity loss. If science decided to employ de-extinction techniques as a way of assisting conservation programs, its participants need to be able to agree upon a best mode of attack. This then begs further questions like, which scientific or political body would be in charge of the assignment? Would citizens of the world get to vote on its methods? Who would be responsible if the project failed in its mission? As some of these methods are already being practiced, it has never been more important to cool the concept into heel before it takes off on a global scale. The process of de-extinction is inherently artificial, and any positive or negative impact will be by virtue of our own actions. It has been argued, however, that since humans are ecological participants of the world, like any other species, human intervention could be considered a natural occurrence. Could this then be an argument in favour of de-extinction? Unlikely, as it would then also imply that, say, all forms of human pollution are natural. Using reductio ad absurdum, or the fallacy of extending an argument to absurd proportions, we can show that this viewpoint is inherently flawed, as human beings are moral agents, possessing a moral compass as well as the capacity to reason. Regardless if our actions have been natural or not, we are aware of how the ways in which we live impose unnecessary harm on the environment. We are also aware of science's failed attempts at biological control, and the irreversible ecological damage it has resulted in. Rational philosophy, such as Kantian ethics, prevails in this instance. As long as morality derives itself from reason, it is fairly objective to get a sense of what is virtuous and what isn't. The liberal argument in support of de-extinction accepts death as a byproduct of scientific innovation, as the end goal is ecological sustainability. The conservative view, on the other hand, comes from a position that values animal rights theory and an autonomous environment. Stuart Harrop, an environmental law researcher, describes the epistemological gulf between animal welfare and nature conservation frustrating a practical working relationship. He predicts a need for the two parties to work together, as the combined effects of climate change will force more animals into captive settings. The two viewpoints clash on the fundamental acceptance of collateral damage for the greater good. However, both viewpoints tend to agree on our deontological duty to nature, even if conservatism prefers an autonomous environment. Since our actions have already negatively impacted our environment, many animal rights theorists, who are instinctively opposed to de-extinction methods, believe that we are responsible for repairing the damage we have caused and returning our environment to its previous self-reliant form. Yu-Xue Lo argues this by saying, whether human technology is involved in a nature restoration project is simply irrelevant to whether the purpose behind the project is anthropocentric or not. Lo also points out that human intervention does not always involve control, but can entail cooperation between humans and animals. He claims that intervention is not inherently destructive, especially if its goal is to restore a natural balance. It also does not take away nature's characteristics. In conclusion, I will leave you with this image of an actor portraying a Neanderthal resurrected through reproductive cloning technology. The social experiment depicted is a powerful reminder of the ethical quandaries engendered by the process. It opens all moral floodgates and encourages people to reflect on biological scientific innovation, in particular its shortcomings within the context of moral philosophy.